In this video, I would like to talk about our manual plasma cutter. I say manual because we actually have two plasma cutters here in the shop. We have the manual plasma cutter, which you operate by hand and have to make a template, and then we have the CNC plasma cutter, which is driven by a computer. This video, I'm going to concentrate on the handheld one, which is the simpler of the two, obviously. So the plasma cutter is down here in the shop next to the welders. It's the yellow machine. It says PowerCut 650 on it right there. Both plasma cutters need air. The way that a plasma cutter works basically is it creates an arc of electricity similar to the arc welder, and then it fires compressed air through the nozzle. And those two things combined will cut steel. This will cut up to 1/4 inch of steel. Now, you can freehand a cut if you like, but that can tend to be a little bit sloppy. It's a bit like drawing. So you can draw with steel, in steel with the plasma cutter. But you can also make a template, which I'm going to show you in a moment here. To set the plasma cutter up is not unlike setting up the welder. There's a series of cables attached to it. There's a ground line just like the welder. So you need to unravel all of that from the front of the machine first. After that, you have to plug in the air compressor, and you need to set the pressure to be adequate for the machine, which is 80 psi. Similar to the welder, you need to clamp your ground line either to the workpiece or very close to it on a piece of metal. So the table's metal, you can clamp it to the table. I'm going to go ahead and clamp it right to my workpiece so that I'm sure I get good contact. If you're not planning on drawing freehand, you'll need to make a template. Now, the best thing to do is to cut a piece of scrap and with the plasma cutter and see what the distance is from the edge of the scrap piece to the actual cut. Because when you use a template, the distance, this is the head of the plasma cutter, and so it's usually between a 3/8, half of an inch. I'll figure it out and I can post it in the comments of this video. But depending on the angle you hold this at, that can change. But what that means is you're going to want to make your template either a little bit bigger if you're cutting on the inside of a shape, or a little bit smaller if you're cutting on the outside of the shape than the shape that you actually want the steel to be. So I have this circular template here that's just a cut off from something else. I'm going to use it to demonstrate. I'm going to cut a circle out of this piece of steel. You'll notice that I have it clamped to the table with a couple of these adjustable clamps, and I have it hanging off the edge. Our table down here it has this sort of grill on it with holes, and so oftentimes you can cut right on top of that. But I find that sometimes when the plasma cutter goes over the workpiece where one of the pieces of the grill are, it doesn't always cut all the way through, and that can be a hassle. So if possible, I like to just hang my workpiece off the edge of the table so that I know when it cuts through, it's cutting all the way through the steel. Now, this will throw sparks, which you're going to see in a moment. So you want to make sure that you have enough protective gear on and that you're wearing decent shoes. This is one of the reasons why you never wear open-toed shoes or flip-flops in the shop, especially to do metal work. I'm also going to put on a long sleeve smock when I do this, just to make sure that I don't get anything bouncing back and burning my arms. Here's the control panel for the plasma cutter. You can see that it has a power light, and the power switch is actually in the back. Now you can see that it's on because the light is lit. There's an air test function, and there's an air gauge. So right now we're at a little bit above 80. When I turn it on, it ducks down a little below 80. So that's probably good. If I feel like it's not blowing the slag through the cut, I'll crank it up a little bit. Then you have a simple current, minimum 15, maximum 40. This has to do with the thickness of your materials. Again, if you're cutting 1/4 inch, you want to put it all the way up. If you're cutting something very thin, you might want to put it down around between 15 and 20. I'm doing a piece of 1/8 inch plate steel, so I'm going to leave it up between 25 and 30. And if I feel like that's not working, I may turn it up a little bit. If you have this set too high, what can happen is there can be a buildup of residue called dross on the back side of the cut, which can be annoying to get rid of. So it is worthwhile to find the right setting. It's also important when using the plasma cutter to wear gloves and a face shield because it does put out a very bright light. And I'm going to tuck my jeans in over my boots so that the sparks don't go down inside my boots. Lastly, you need to turn on both vent fans, the same as you would if you were using the torch or the welder. The smoke from the plasma cutter will set off the fire alarms. So, there we go. I have a circle cut out of my template. Now, if you look closely on this, you can see some of that buildup that I mentioned, and you'll notice that the edge isn't quite perfect. There are some bumps and some wobbles to it. But I can take this over to the bench grinder and get it to be pretty close to a working circle. If you wanted a perfect shape, perfect geometry, or perfect circle, you'd be better off to use the CNC plasma cutter. But for quick things, it's kind of fun to use the handheld plasma cutter. It has some benefits that the CNC doesn't. It's also important to recognize that the speed at which you move the nozzle around the template will have an impact on what you're cutting. If you move too quickly, the metal can melt back together behind you, which is very similar to what happens with the oxyacetylene torch. If you move too fast, it might not cut all the way through. So you want to make sure that you're moving at a sort of steady pace and that sparks are coming out of the bottom of the workpiece the whole time. If you noticed, when I cut that, I had to backtrack and recut a couple of spots that didn't cut all the way through before this shape came out of my workpiece. And of course, when you're all done using the plasma cutter, please wind up all the cables again, disconnect the air hose, and let it slowly retract back to the wheel where it lives. You can put all your gloves away, you can clean up any mess that you might have made, and basically leave the metal cage the way that you found it.